Grid is the cheapest source of power in Nigeria today.
Of course.
That we cannot overstress the importance of the regulatory body. If you see the banking sector, you can see the efforts on exchange rates. You can see the efforts on capitalization of banks. Same thing with the NCC. You can see the efforts and direction on broadband, for example. So our sector requires that coordination for sure. And I think certain proximity to the highest decision-making body. If we leave the government to do coordination in the power sector, then we're doing the same thing and expecting a different result.
Good day and welcome to another episode of Connecting the Dots. I'm joined by my very good friend from the HBS days with Kristen K and Donald back in the day, Erabor Okogun, who is the head of Energy Infrastructure Advisory at KPMG. Erabor, welcome.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure.
As I just mentioned, I've known you for a really long time, almost going on 12 years now, and you've done a lot of things in the sector. Could you just give us a brief background so people kind of get experience of all the work you've done throughout the continent?
Yeah, thanks. I think we've spent on and off for the last 20 years been in the energy space. Like most Nigerians, you cut your teeth in oil and gas, in that part of the value chain. Funding field development plans, JV and MPC JV cash call shortfalls in the late 90s and early 2000s. And then like everyone in the sector, the privatization we thought it was a good idea. And it was fantastic reforms. When the act was set up, that's created embed NERC. So the fantastic regulation to bring in private investments. And so we got involved in the privatization. And with the privatization, we saw the opportunities in the value chain, the power value chain. We saw obviously that there was regulation to drive an energy mix, support the privatization exercise. Now you have Gencos, now the opportunities for IPPs. And so we pursued that for a while and was able to develop about 600 megawatts and then started covering West Africa, trying to originate and de-risk renewable energy projects in wind, solar, hydro and hybrids. And we've just used that knowledge to advise governments, sponsors, and lenders.
Interesting. So on May 29th, the president was sworn in 2023. He immediately at Eagle Square declared no fuel subsidy, right? Which got us to the place where fuel went from Silan almost 900 naira, almost like 100% increase or more actually. But over the last year, there has not been fuel queues, there has not been any strikes, things have worked normally because in my mind, he's created market that it's hands off from governments and things are moving forward. Do you think if you would have done the same thing on May 29th and said, power sector, no more subsidies, we'll fix your prices, let's see how the sector goes, do you think the sector would be in a better place than it is now?
That's a good comparative analogy. And I think it will, because subsidies are very inefficient. In fact, for petrol, the subsidies were subsidizing those with fleets of cars. And those mostly in the urban areas. And subsidies tend to institutionalize inefficiencies in the value chain and distort the market. In a way, some subsidies were announced and removed in the power sector by the creation of Band A tariff,
The you mean the service-based tariff?
service SBTs. Um, and so with Band A increased to over 200 naira, there was sort of at least for that band, removal of subsidy.
But that exercise was quite interesting, right? Because originally, when it was announced, it was at 230 something. Then they chewed it up and they brought it down. The market brought it down to a number that made a bit more. That was non-cost reflective, essentially, correct?
I mean, the drivers of the costs, and like Maito, the multi-year tariff order, there are building blocks that create the tariff. Generation cost, the cost of gas, inflation, the CPI, and also the FX component. So different line items that create a tariff. So naturally, as certain of those metrics has changed, automatically the tariff it changed.
Mm,
And only yesterday, for example, the exchange rates had dropped below 1,500.
mm,
Um, and inflation has come down. And then gas prices have had a few changes here and there over time. So that's where the drivers for that change in band A. But be as it may, it is still at that 200 or thereabout plus VAT is still it's still create margins to service the value chain because the discos are essentially collection agents for everyone else. It's not as if that tariff, they're taking all of it.
mm,
They've created a waterfall and escrow account that they can't short touch until the service providers make their
paid off,
money.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's if in fact there is a school of thought that says, and the discourse might agree with you, maybe the general public may not, but if you look at fuel prices, there are no strikes, there are no queues, and the prices actually go down. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing will happen in the power sector if, for example, all bands are band A tomorrow, right?
Yeah, but given the socio-economic state that the country is in, that might not be attainable because I think 40% of Nigerians are living with less than $1 a day.
Now, I think that if you look at mini grids, for example, that are supposed to address this 40 million people, um, they're paying higher than band A. I don't know
True.
any mini grid that's less than band A or
No.
not or equal to band A.
Yeah, they're
Right.
around 200,
Yeah.
over
So
200. Yeah.
so it is a fallacy to believe that there's going to be a big impact on the poor. Because right now poor pay more for the power that they get.
Mm.
And then there's the opportunity cost of not having power, for instance, in healthcare facilities.
Mm-hmm. I agreed.
Right. So but I think that if that was to happen, then there should be a clear, deliberate, coordinated plan and investments and development and projects that have been identified that are near term ready to build that will drive the economies of scale that's able to, within a relatively short time, bring down that price just because of the efficiencies and the capital and the skill that comes to
Mm-hmm.
the table and the reduction in investments that now drive AT&C and also downwards. And then all the solutions are now coming to the market that addresses with a different type of technology or access these sort of vulnerable, those without energy access.
Yeah, I think when we think through that, it sounds ideal, but given that a lot of things are not quite as straight as they are, it'll take time. But what we've been doing is we're digging a massive hole with the subsidies that we're paying. I think you hear numbers that our debt on the generation side is runs in the trillions of naira. Uh, but I think the what's interesting about generation side is we're paying for gas. Gas is the biggest component on how we generate. I think it's 85% mix, 85 to 15, depending on the time of year. Renewables are something that I'm speaking specifically on solar and wind, on something that we haven't quite capitalized on, given conversations around energy transition, cleaner, and just more affordable power. Why are we still here that we haven't quite picked up the RE sector and to actually drive it on a large scale?
I mean, we do have the policies in place. I mean, there's Vision 2030, for example, that says by the year 2030, 5 years from now, that we'll have 30% of the generation as renewables, right?
Interestingly enough, I was sitting in the Ministry of Power 10 years ago when we were talking about the same policy.
Absolutely.
And 2030 seemed like it's far ago.
Yes,
We
yes.
haven't moved.
The needle hasn't moved. It's also like the other day, someone was saying they launched a decade of gas, right? Where's the country in terms of utilization of gas? Same thing, there was a 2030, and we're 5 years down the road. So the policies are there. And I think um and the demand is there. And if you go and look at the NCC, National Control Center's dashboard, you would see that the national demand forecast is 20 gigawatts every day. What the grid is able to dispatch is about 6, 7 gigawatts, right? What's installed in generation is about 13. So shake it, slice it, we still have headroom, even if it's just for grid solutions, of about 7 gigawatts.
For sure.
Now, sometimes a couple of reasons why renewables haven't come through. We worked with NSIA on the first utility scale renewable energy plant, ASCII,
10 megawatt.
10 megawatts, right? And we built that in Kombucho. The site was selected, and we just came in and did all the studies. One of the first things we did was the energy demand study. Where is this power going to go? The Chalawa industrial area, which is about 5 kilometers away, there was 30 megawatts that we surveyed of self-generation. So there was 3x what we wanted to build. So the demand is there. Self-generation is certainly more expensive than a grid solution.
Definitely.
Grid is the cheapest source of power in Nigeria today.
Of course.
And so we also looked at the interconnection point. And we did the interconnection study to be sure there was grid referencing and there was no need to put even battery storage, right? And that got built. But that got built through wayside public funds. There was some intervention or some recovery from somewhere, but we used to build it. The challenge with financing renewables, particularly grid tied, is that it seems to be mostly only possible with project financing on a non or partial recourse basis, where you require the credibility and liquidity of the off-taker to fund a 20-year PPA, right? And on a project finance basis, because of the challenges with two kinds of risk, dispatch risk and payment risk, equity risk, large-scale renewable project on a project finance basis can't be built if that is the basis in which they will be financed. So the 10 megawatts was built because it was on a project finance basis, right? And today there's an off-taker PPA arrangement in place.
But that's not on grid, right?
So my definition of on grid is if it's anything from 33 kV and above. So this is on 33 kV, right? So 33 kV is still part of the grid. even though you could call it distributed renewable energy, a
Because
DRE.
that's really being dispatched by panel disco.
It's been dispersed at the distribution grid level. So it's not off grid, totally cut off on an isolated basis and just serving the community. Right. My view is that if you're able to do it at 33 kV, that is still grid tied, right? Um, and so that's the major thing. The business model and the financing model is one of the reasons, and also the state of the structure. But I don't even think that's a constraint because that's an engineering solution. That's a design solution where if you need to reinforce the grid at the interconnection stage, you can do that. In fact, QIPP, which is the Kwa Ibio power plant, it's a gas power plant, had two tariffs at the time. It had a tariff for the energy, it had a tariff for the infrastructure because they realized there was an infrastructure gap, right? So I think for renewable energies to work, we've got to relook at the business model, look at the financing, and move away from the what the I means in IPP to what the I means in our current market, in which my opinion, it's integrated.
Integrated, yeah.
Right? So you have is independent. But if it's independent, then you're not you're not properly allocating that risk, to be honest. Because you're assuming that your dispatch risk will be handled by third party, ECN, in this case, on NISO DSP. And then your payment at the time was going to be handled by a central off-taker, which is embed. And you're competing with, the other parties. Even though with the payment waterfall, it's a lot easier. The last point, which I think is slightly unfortunate, which is why I started with the statistics I started with, is that though there is a perception that there is so much gas that we don't need renewables. But yes, the gas molecules in the ground, right? And they've been in the ground for 2 generations. And if they've been in the ground for 2 generations, and even in the decade of gas, despite all the efforts, we still have 40 million people without electricity. So there has to be a view that let's bring all our energy resources to the table. Because, if you're able to attract financing for renewables, the same investment committee that you go for gas is likely the same investment committee and financing source that has approved a renewable energy project. And therefore, they will be comfortable with the power sector. They will be comfortable with your project, right? And it further reduces EPC political and whatever cost and risks for everybody.
But isn't there a bias that the oil and gas sector is very is an established sector? So given that it's established and people already know how it works, the propensity to just keep doing it is easier than trying to create the space, bring solar panels in, and it just creates a learning that I don't think we've had the patience to really sit down and grind it out.
Yes, it's ironic that in all of these conversations, Nigerians are voting with their money and vote. I don't know anyone who goes and says I'm importing a gas turbine on a regular, right? But I think last year Nigerians brought in about 1 gigawatt of solar panels.
Yeah.
Right. So that's enough should signal that, we need to think seriously about renewables, right? If you stand in one of the highest buildings in Lagos, I'm on the 13th, I'm on the 11th floor. It's a 13-story building. And every month when I look out of the building, I see new solar panels on bank roofs, on malls, on people's homes. So nobody's asking, government, where is the other energy source?
Yeah, so it's working. It's just
It is working even
Yeah.
in Lagos, right?
Which
The radiation is not so
yeah.
great compared to if it's in Kano, right? So yes, there is the inertia to change. In fact, the laws, when we started, the ESIA law was for gas and refineries.
Mm-hmm.
And the category they put renewable energy was the same category they put for refinery. This is clean energy that's very benevolent to the environment.
Mm.
It was the same category as a waste recycling plant, as a refinery, as an oil field,
Mm-hmm.
right? We had to sit down with the Ministry of Environment and make representation to them
Amazing.
that you cannot categorize renewable energy, clean energy, with what is quote unquote dirty. They subsequently changed that category for everybody subsequently who's going there is because of what we did. Same thing applies to um, decision makers
Mm-hmm.
who are used to last projects. But the other thing I always make a joke about is that if you come to stakeholders, you as a renewable energy developer, and I as an upstream oil and gas developer, my currency for the market is in dollars. Your currency for the market is in
Yeah.
naira,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Nigeria's revenue, if Nigeria's a business, Nigeria's main business is dollar denominated oil
Definitely.
and gas.
Mm-hmm.
That's our major source of revenue, right? And so there's a mindset change that you've pointed out too, that, you know, I may not be coming to you with a dollar denominated transaction because if I sell, you know, 50,000 barrels of oil from a new field, you can see the dollar figures right there.
Mm-hmm.
It's an international market. I'm exporting it and bringing dollars into the country. But if I say, hey, you know what? I want to put in the same capital into a renewable energy
Yeah.
project that's going to generate power, and you think, oh, this guy is going to have associated gas, flare gas, or something, and is going to, maybe do LNG or
Mm-hmm.
do gas to power. There is this mindset that say, you know what, we're kind of used to this. It's giving Nigeria money,
Yeah.
but there's a huge opportunity cost of not having quality power for our jobs, industrialization, our GDP, everything that makes us competitive, everything that improves quality of life and the IGR that that brings into state coffers, right? That I think, countries losing out and missing out.
There's so many thoughts around all these things you've said. We know them. We know that if we use solar to increase power supply, in the long run, it'll be cheaper. In the long run, it'll create more jobs. In the long run, quality of life changes. All these things are improved. But it's just hard to do because there's no joined up approach. There's some people are pushing solar on this side, some people are pushing nuclear, some people are pushing all sorts of things. So I feel like the sector is just in a bit of a disarray because there's just so many different points of views. How do we you've been around for a couple of decades in this space. How do you effectively coordinate them? What's the pathway to ensure that people actually are reading from the same page?
Um, I remember when Professor Batnerjee, had this task force. I think that was the last time there was real coordination in the sector. And I mean,
The previous government would argue that under the vice president they had the OVP.
well, the thing was that task force was able to bring all the silos and verticals and interfaces, you know, um, in one room, right?
What made it work? Because there's so many different personalities and so many different expertise
Yeah.
and personalities in the same room. How were they all able to coordinate?
I think it's a political will, right? Is that proximity to the highest decision making body in the land, which is the presidency, right? And and because they brought expertise in the presidency across the value chain, right? If an initiative came in, no matter where it came from, you had that expertise immediately available. You had distribution expertise, you had gas, you had transmission, you had finance, you had legal, you had all in that task force, right? It's different from having an individual, right? Even though the ministry was there, it was easier for the ministry to be able to have clarity to policy, right? And then because you have several entry points into the power sector, you come in through discos, you come in through BPE, come in through TCN, you come in through finance, you come to the donor groups, right? Today, there's you will wake up today and hear, oh, one MDA has signed a deal on some power project, right?
Mm-hmm.
So today you have the Siemens project doing transmission. You have REA doing theirs. You got BPE doing
NDPHC,
DISREP. You got
NDPHC.
NDPHC doing NIPPs.
Mm-hmm.
The list goes on. So ordinarily, I think the regulator, and we must not overstress, or rather, we cannot overstress the importance of the regulatory body,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you see the banking sector, right, you can see the efforts on exchange rates.
Mm.
You can see the efforts on capitalization of banks, right? Um, Same thing with NCC. You can see the efforts and direction on broadband, for example, right? And there, or even in NUPRC, you can see the policy on gas commercialization, on the implementation of the PIA. So our sector requires that coordination for sure, and I think um, certain proximity to the highest um, decision making body. Certainly, the Ministry of Power is there, and the minister is doing a fantastic job. But we must realize that this is post privatization Ministry of Power, right? Where you have a decoupled
Yeah.
private value chain, and now you have state electricity markets, right? So the Minister doesn't have oversight over states,
Yeah.
right? So it means that the coordination you're talking about is even now more important, because of all these moving parts. And to connect dots, as we're talking about, requires that bird's eye view and that very, very strong midwifing of of issues. Now, one of the things that I think would help is the speed to moving from a transitional electricity market to meter.
So moving from TEM to that NEM, I guess
Yes,
call it.
where it's willing buyer, willing seller, bilateral, where the private sector is driving the efficiency of coordination. If we leave the government to do coordination in the power sector, then we're doing the same thing and expecting a different result. You don't ask how the private sector, the banks are coordinating their branches, their treasury systems.
It's working.
It's working. Or you're not trying to coordinate what the telcos are doing, right? Or you're not looking for an entity in the presidency to do that. Right?
But isn't that because those industries were largely left to run by themselves? For instance, if we look at what happened in the power sector, the government staying involved in transmission signaled, from an outsider's point of view, that government is so fully involved. But like back in the day, Nitel was sold off. A
Yeah.
bunch of these things were sold off
And
and said,
new frequencies and new players
you guys
came in,
decide what you want to do with it.
and
Then,
which network you want to be on.
but we'll create an environment. So I think that's the big difference. When we were speaking, you talked about this very famous word we hear all the time, political will. What does that mean in two sentences? Like, because everyone uses it as, oh, the will, political will. What does that actually mean in the power sector?
Uh, Because the power sector is almost in a twilight zone between government ownership and private sector participation, and where there is still control over market forces,
Mm-hmm.
right? Political will really is to hands off control of tariffs, right? If there's political will to let the market determine what price
The
should
market
be,
forces rather than
yes, rather than, and that's why when you talk about Dangote refinery, right? Um, Before someone will announce, it could be even a national broadcast, December 31st, everybody's going to buy petrol those days because by January 1st, the president is going to announce a change in
price.
prices. So you would go historically, Obasanjo increased it 3 times. Now, the president, our president today, has no
That's
business,
your
no organ of government announces price of petrol. Neither does it announce price of diesel. Why are we announcing price of electricity or gas?
It's that conundrum that we all thinking through that people feel like electricity is a social like a right as opposed to a business. And anything that costs money, it's hard to make that argument that it should be a social good unless government wants to fund it fully. And clearly that's not happening.
It's a conundrum because I'm always curious why if the government and if the political system has been comfortable with having the market determine the price of a minute of a call,
Mm-hmm.
right? Having the market determine a liter of petrol. Why is there going to be an uproar if you let the market determine the price of electricity? So it's or price of gas, and if I bring that in as well, and that's why political will is such a common conversation because somebody, the way the president announced subsidies gone, right? It took a lot of political will. It got a lot of heat for it, but today you can see the benefits, and I think that's why political will is so central to power sector. We need to get the market to work, right? Nobody sets the price of new generators, right?
Market does.
You just go, this is your house, this is your factory, you do your energy load and say, I need 40 kVA, I need 100 kVA. You call XYZ, they come and install it. The Minister of Power, the President has no business setting a price. They will do their maths, the clearing costs, the shipping costs, labor costs, to the even extent we started manufacturing diesel generators,
Yeah.
right? And that's what the market does. Efficiency, flow of investments, creation of jobs, driving IGR, and definitely, you know, the development and industrialization that we are looking for. Market forces need to drive it. Perhaps maybe with this, if BPDG has said you're going to prioritize a couple of Gencos and Discos next year, maybe the more these entities
The
are not.
privatized, like drop off 40% of this.
Yes, and then with TCN, NISO's board, which is split now, TCN split, NISO's board is entirely private sector board members, right? And there seems to be movement in that direction, and I think it should certainly be speeded up. Um, and, and today you hear about Mission 300, right? Which is 300 million Africans by the year 2030. It's 5 years to go, right? And Nigeria is unique by its combination of private and public sector. But even with Mission 300, we have seen, I was in Tanzania for the heads of state compact launch. We could see that the president attended it. That's again political will. But we could see that private sector was still outside looking in, right? And I think we need to reverse that, and get the private sector to drive Mission 300, to drive, because take pension funds, for instance, trillions of naira sitting there, in pension, in PFAs, right? There's no PFA that I know, apart from maybe that for the police, that is owned by the government, right? So this is private capital. How do you bring this significant amount of private capital? And then we capitalization of banks, right? 200 billion. And government saying they're no longer going to be borrowing, and therefore buying treasury bills. So next year, we would see new tax law, so there's lots of revenue in public sector, and therefore sitting in the banks. The banks are going to hold this tax. Yeah. You will see 200 billion that banks have capitalized.
Recover, yeah.
Right? So we just have to bring in, private capital in.
But I struggle with bringing in private capital because there's no pathway that a private investor knows that their money will come back unless you build a ring fence system rather than if you put your money in a disco. If you have, I'm sure you have $100 million, and I'm sure you wouldn't give it to a disco.
To the contrary, indeed I will.
You would.
Maybe because I know what I know, but I like to use proxies, right? So if you particularly ban A impact, disco revenue, it's quite significant. I think disco revenue grew by 40%.
That's one ban.
Just one ban, right? Now, if you have 4 states like Abuja Disco has, or relatively that's the number of states, states that you cover, irrespective of what happened with the state electricity markets, right? If I was building, and in fact, that's the benefit of even the state electricity markets, by the way. I think before this podcast, I said I got a call from someone who told me he just raised $10 million
in Nigeria.
In Nigeria.
It's a farm?
No. Right. Well, the farm electricity. But yeah. He's building a solar farm.
Right? Oh, interesting.
Well, yes. And he is distributing this solar energy with $10 million. Right. So discos have been quite creative. So you would not hear of any disco that the staff went on strike because they couldn't pay salaries. Have you heard of something like that?
No.
No. Right? So discos are yes, they're keeping the lights on. Yes, they're losses, right? But I believe that what you need in a disco is to just fix the business model, right? The way MTN reached its business model that is no longer involved in the last mile. So you have IHS with 15,000 towers, American Towers, they manage those last mile on an SLA basis, and that has improved liquidity. So I would come into a disco I will change the business model. Right? I will deploy capital in partnership with all the service providers. I will change the way I interplay with my customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
With 200 million Nigerians, I'm between the ages of 18 and 60, the working population,
Mm-hmm.
you got 80 million Nigerians, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are consuming and buying and purchasing and doing things that require electricity, right? For me, it's just one, the type of capital that you raise. So if you raise dollars, you got to figure out how you're going to solve
Make your money back in
the
dollars. Yeah.
currency element,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then secondly, the tenure. Thirdly, in my opinion, adopting an ecosystem approach.
Mm. Is there I framed this. You've said a few things you would do with it. Disclose to change the
Yeah.
model and how
So
you
you
move
just
forward.
identify the risks, right?
Yeah.
Now you know there's a waterfall with escrow.
Mm-hmm.
That the lenders get their money, the service providers get their money, and there is regulated investments that you reinvest,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, what that therefore means is that you can work with that waterfall. And there is an opportunity by the regulator for secondary waterfalls.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's where it's you ring fence your the capital. But it's a bit of work, right? That needs to
Mm-hmm.
go into it. It's been tested here and there. Um, but the purchasing power. So if you want to displace people doing self-generation, like we looked at in Kano on the 10 megawatts, you would find a lot of headroom for growth. You might call it ring fencing, you might call it integrated, but there is an opportunity where you can be quite creative, because there is that naira that's chasing power,
Power. Yeah.
and so bringing much demand and supply, uh, tie that to the financing, then you have a good deal.
So, my last question was going to be around what regulatory changes you would make if you could make one.
I think that one is a tariff, right?
To liberalize the tariff.
Liberalize the tariff. Um, the second will be activate for renewables, activate the renewable energy obligation. I think section 167 or 164 of the Electricity Act, just activate it. The renewable energy obligations and the renewable generation obligations. And then the third thing will be totally remove a cap on licensing requirements or raise the cap from 1 megawatt
What to 10,
to 10 or 20 or 40, like in South Africa, right?
it's 100, right?
I think it's about 50,
50. Okay.
right? So remove the restrictions will be that thing. Restriction on tariffs, restriction on licensing.
Mm.
Could do it for a period of time.
Time, of course.
That for me would be one singular sort of regulatory change. Like
All right. So, last question. How long do you think it'll be till the first grid integrated plant comes in that's renewable at the 132 level onto the grid?
that's a $1 million question. Those
But it's
change.
skill, right? If
Yeah,
33 is great, 10 megawatts is great. But
yeah,
if you look across our neighbors up north, they're doing 500 megawatts of solar on grid. Why
yeah.
can't we do it?
Saudi is doing gigawatts. And they're an oil and gas nation. Egypt obviously is
Yeah.
doing gigawatts of renewables. And they're also, an oil and gas
Mm-hmm.
nation. Um, I'm going to say that if I was going to give it time, just because if I look at all the projects that I'm aware of, that take the 14 solar or take other independently been developed solutions.
Mm-hmm.
The good thing about the 14 solar, for example, they all have, land rights. Yeah, yeah, I mean, environmental EIA, they have the grid connections agreements. They had PPAs with Embed. They were almost ready to build beyond the issue of sovereign guarantees and partial risk guarantees to deal with the payment risks around Embed. So those we're ready to build, but there's embedded sort of falling away or sort of in transition. There's been a call for bilateral markets. Um, so the landscape for utility scale at the time they were all signed, has changed remarkably.
Definitely.
So they have to be redesigned, and that might take a bit of time. But there are a couple of projects that are looking to do bilateral, using a bit of what Connexa is doing, like a virtual power plant. So it's tied in at the 132, and then using the eligible customer switching mechanism, are able to serve customers further away.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So those ones, I would say you probably could get about 100 or 200 megawatts of renewable energy coming on the grid within the next 2 years or there.
Years. Okay. So 2 years. And it's that model where if it starts, other people will copy, and once you copy, you now grow and scale.
Yeah.
Really, Erabor, this has been quite insightful. I think when I think through this renewable energy sector, you've led the conversation, you've led the charge. I think you're one of the first people to sign a wind PPA in the country.
Sure.
So you've been on the forefront of the renewable energy conversation, especially the large scale models. Thank you again for your time. We look forward to having you back. I'll write this down. What are we in September 2025? September 2027, we'll have you back to see if we have the 200 megawatts on grid.
Wow, it sounds like a personal challenge.
Well, if it's going to happen, well, you kind of have to do it, Erabor.
Yeah, I think we just have to roll up our sleeves. You can no longer sit by the sidelines and wait all the forwarders. We just have to participate. And I think, we're doing that right now. I think we probably have to do more.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Erabor.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Emeka.
See you soon.
All right, cheers.
This podcast is brought to you by Next Year Capital, committed to driving conversations that shape Africa's energy future. Please subscribe, share, and stay tuned. Until next time, I am Emeka Jr., and this has been Connecting the Dots.